Hi, my name is Lucas Murray and this is my 30-second self-portrait. Too much talking because I don't profess to be the expert.
Thank you, Lucas. That was really interesting. I wanted to keep going, but I was like,
I wasn't sure how long it spoke for.
Lucas, I would love to hear about your story and how you got to where you are today and kind of what gets you out of bed these days. Because I know there's a lot of things going on. So maybe that's where we start.
Yeah, so it's interesting. One thing I will say, I try and map everything out in my mind before I answer, and I sometimes just keep talking as I'm mapping it out.
Would you like a piece of paper?
So here's so what gets me out of bed at the moment, a lot of it is the opportunity to make a difference. And there's various avenues to do that, and there's always opportunities to really have add some meaningful intervention into the world or into life, and even if it's just with one person, even if it's just for me, my child, my wife, doing this podcast. So I love the opportunity to connect with people and hopefully work together on an outcome that's beneficial for me and everybody else and yourself. So it's a very global statement.
Well, I think it shows a lot in your work, right? Because you're one of the founders of Sydney Design Thinking, and you're a coach, and you're a designer. So it's kind of like all of those things are about making a difference, right?
Yeah,
it feels
for sure.
Like. And every time I hear you talk, it's all about the connections it's all about people.
And my natural inclination is to sit in that world of systems thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Sit back, and my trade is a service designer, or almost think a facilitator and communicator. Help people see other people's perspectives and then hopefully come to a point of alignment, or and even if you can't come to a point of alignment, come to a point where you can say we need to discuss this difference. There's differences that nobody else sees, because you can communicate, you work out how to communicate through various means, and obviously think visual. There's a visual element to that. There's also the linguistic language moment and body language. Like there's all these different ways of communicating. And even now in a machine-driven AI world, there is sort of a machine language as well that we need to start learning how to speak more fluently.
I'd love to understand a bit more about that. You talk a lot about storytelling. Like when you came to Think Visual last year, your whole talk was about storytelling and being able to present ideas in a way that's very impactful, especially your story. You're talking a lot about someone's story and how they could get buy-in. So I wonder how that ties into what you're saying about the machine.
Yeah.
We need to talk like machines.
And I mean, if I take a step back and just think about storytelling itself. So I love the hero's journey. So Joseph Campbell wrote a book in the 40s, I think it was. And he did a lot of studies on a lot of mythological stories and even business stories and stories through the millennia.
Yeah.
And then identified there's very codified patterns behind most stories. There might be a few little variances of how you might change things in different ways, but the foundational construct of most stories are the same. So he coined this term called the hero's journey. And as a service designer, I'm almost trained to see patterns, because when you see the patterns, you design around those patterns. Normally those patterns are what give you scale or give you strategic advantage in a business context. So when you see that, when most people are pitching, so if you look at any business pitch from a startup perspective, even if it's only 4 or 5 steps, and the hero's journey might have, depending on who's written the summarization of Joseph Campbell's work, might have up to 13 or 14 or 15 steps, sometimes 5 or 6, but you can look at a pitch deck and you'll see the construct of the hero's journey in a pitch deck. So I really recommend people go and learn about the hero's journey and then look at how people pitch and try and influence decisions and see those ones that are actually most often picked normally have a nice story arc to them.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that makes sense on several levels. I mean, we talk a lot about that as well, because we're always talking about how to present your work through visual storytelling, and going through that, like those kind of arcs that are quite typical in terms of storytelling. I think they do a couple of things, and one of them is just the human connection. Like we relate to stories so quickly. It's emotional, and it's a very human thing, and that's why, you know, we love movies and books and stories just in general. But then you put yourself in that. Like if you're listening to a story, you're able to kind of place yourself in there, and it's kind of like an empathetic thing.
Yes.
And then you kind of get buy-in.
Yeah, 100%.
Pretty quickly.
And that empathy, like in a design context, we often will go to the customer and do human-centered design, and might be the customer, might be a business user, but you also can do the same thing with your business stakeholders and have empathy for them, in the sense they have to make a key decision. What do they need? What's their call to action? So whilst you might be talking about a customer journey and an outcome that we need to solve at a business level and looking at new features or a new product, but then you also need to take that back and take that business lens, which is its own story within the story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's always these little mini arcs within a story. Even as you go through the hero's journey itself, there might be little arcs of story, little mini stories as you go along.
And it's making you more empathetic as a designer, right? Because you're...
And I'll literally think about when I go into facilitation in a workshop, I'll literally look at the room and work out who's in the room. Is it sales and marketing? Is it the product manager? Is it risk and finance and HR? And what's their perspective? What are they accountable and responsible for? What's their call to action? Yeah. And then as you're facilitating, you'll try and make sure you unearth their perspective from that resonates with them. And then you can map that out in a way that's visible if you're using maps. Like I love blueprints because it's a visual tool that you can point at, and it's a great way to hold the room and everyone's pointing at the same thing at the same time, hopefully. So it's a form of language that helps you tell a story. But you can bubble these things up and say, at this point in the story, it's either coherent and it's all working and we're aligned. And if it's not, then let's have a conversation about how we get to a point of alignment, which might be changing a policy if it's risk and compliance. It might be changing the way a feature works if it's an experience-led discussion.
Wow. Okay. So how is that changing?
I think this sort of gets into the AI space, and that machine language itself is a language. Actually, even before I go there, it's I'm curious if you know how Google Translate works.
Not really. No.
Or at least how it's sort of constructed its own language in the back end. So I can't remember who told me this, but the way Google Translate works is there's it'll go and take English, and it doesn't have a name to these things. It just goes and maps car to be a concept, and it'll be a concept in its however it thinks. And then if it goes to German and it says in German a car's auto, and it'll go and say it'll map that auto word to that concept in its back end. So it has got its own foundational language that nobody else understands. You can't, as a human, understand it, but it's created its own language as its level of translation between. Right.
I thought it was just several dictionaries from different languages.
Yeah, well, I still can't remember who told me this, and I thought it actually makes sense that you have to have some common foundation.
So it's the concepts,
the concepts,
mapping all the other words to it.
Yeah, and it's concepts and context. So it's not just not just the language. It's like if I say this word in this context, then it means a different concept altogether. Yep. So it uses that to create these patterns and logic. So therefore, I can now link these things together.
Complicated system.
and the way I think about AI, particularly in a design context now, and everyone is talking about AI coding, and how do you farm out work to the AI agents? And I think that is a problem to solve, but I still think we need to solve: are we building the right thing first? And in my experience, I think sometimes we struggle with that because when we go through a design process, I've seen design come up with massive blueprints and wireframes and mock-ups, and then when you get to the user story level, you go and look at someone's backlog and it turns into, I'm just plugging this piece of tech kit into that piece of tech kit. And you've lost the story all the way through, and then you have no idea whether you're actually building the right thing. So what I then see when that does happen is you deliver that piece of working code to a tester, and the tester goes, what am I doing to test this? And then you're reverse engineering the story, and basically you end up making shit up because you've lost all context. So then you have to, the testers will go and talk to the BAs. The BAs, why don't you understand this? And it becomes wasted time and effort because we've lost the story. It's called a user story for a reason, and we don't actually write a story.
Yeah.
Which is the irony of it all. And I think with AI, we have the opportunity to actually get that right. Because you can have conversations, you can have frameworks, you can have patterns and constructs and structure, and then you can get AI to actually codify that story to actually be a story. And then that can be the starting point for the context that you push into a coding framework. And there's still an element of design that you still need to get through as well at a technology level as well.
So that's why you talk about AI agents, right? Because they're basically you're giving them all of that information. They're creating all the connections, basically.
Well, and I think you got to be careful not to give the agents too much, because if you give them too much context, they'll get lost, they'll hallucinate, they won't know what the hell you want them to actually build. So when you watch an engineer coding something today, or a developer coding something today, you can probably go watch YouTube videos of someone this is how you get multiple agents to code for you. So you can have 5 threads of coding, I almost look at engineering now. Engineers, they're almost like the composers, sort of setting the beat for what's going to be built.
Right.
But you still need to codify the task that you give to the agent. That needs to be linked somehow to a story. You can't give an agent the whole context. So you have to work out, how do I take this sort of canonical hierarchical design and distill it down into little bite-sized chunks to then hand off to an agent to code. And then if you've got that traceability, when that code pops out, you also you'll have AI agents testing. They'll test not against what code's being written, they'll be testing against the story, because you'll have that traceability back to the story.
Right. So where does the designer come in now?
So my view, I think in the past and even now still, we tend to, as designers, try to map things very visual, because there is a visual language in the craft of design. Like, we use multiple modalities for communication, so it might be me talking. Yeah. But I find visual maps really useful to walk people through. Like, even that's why we have wireframes. People can imagine themselves going through the screens. Yeah. But if you're going to do everything visually and pump that into an AI agent, it doesn't speak visual as its core foundation. It speaks machine, like it speaks language. It's a large language model, which is words. Yeah. So what I think is the best way to move forward is you sort of have these maps and frameworks. If you have a workshop and you have it very structured, you should be able to harvest that information, produce things into sort of machine readable language, which is nowadays more often than not markdown files, or it might be a JSON file, or it might be something that's easily digestible by a machine. Yeah. And then you might then map that in an end-to-end flow, but then you still want a human to review it. You don't want to give them all the text. It'd be like Google Translate. Instead of giving them all the text in the markdown files, you're going to say, can you map this visually? And you might create a dedicated agent that takes that language and turns it into a visual map. So you may never need to craft the visual elements as much as you did in the past.
So when you say visual map, it's kind of like the blueprint.
The service blueprint. I normally use service blueprints as a means for most big enterprise projects that I would work on.
to me, I have to be honest, it sounds like a very complicated thing that why don't I just do the whole process myself as a designer, I mean, or like the team of designers. So why would I bother to learn this whole new process with to kind of bring in the AI? You mentioned so that the story doesn't get lost.
I think that's where design wants to play anyway. I think
Yeah.
that's something we need to, like, designers do a good job of solving that problem if you bring design in.
Okay.
I think in the past we haven't seen the value in that, so people tend to move away from design when it can actually add value. Like, I would say one of the biggest things you'll get out of having a really good designer or design team is you get clarity.
Okay. What about this process getting so like seamless that you don't really need a designer, so it's just kind of all automated? Is that possible?
I think the role of a designer will change because you still need to drive that communication at a human level. So I think even the best service designers are good facilitators and communicators above all else. So you need to be versant in different languages, including AI language.
It's kind of like retraining in order to be able to bring it all together in a way to communicate it.
Yeah, so you still need to have some element of humans in the loop in that design process.
Yeah.
The more, and it's going to get, to be honest, it's probably going to get less and less human in some ways, because once you get these frameworks, if they are strategic patterns that exist, you'll, at some point, we'll start to trust that model and that pattern.
Okay.
And then you start moving on to other things as a human being, and less and less.
Okay. So I believe that human beings are kind of like, we've got it in us instinctively that we're designers and storytellers. So especially those who chose that as a career, like they're very passionate about it. And how would they put that into play in this kind of situation or world?
Well, I think all the roles that we think about in design, and there's so many different design domains at the moment, even when I talk about engineering as well, like there's elements of engineers that need to start thinking like a designer.
Yes.
There's elements of designers that need to start thinking like engineers and architects. The boundaries between these silos will blur.
Yeah, because they've got more tools at
They've got more tools that allows you to step into other domains.
Yeah.
So, and again, that sort of turns into that I need to be versant across different domains now. I may not even need to go too deep, but it's really
okay. So it's sounding more like it's strategic. So you're able to kind of do a lot more.
Yes.
By yourself.
Yeah. Well, yes, yeah, and you like. I've been coding things just by mapping out the design framework, and then once I've got that then distilled down and I've then run workshops to say this is how I'm architecturally solving that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick React.js, Vercel, and I'm not even a proficient coder. I dabbled in Visual Basic when I was 20 years ago now, and I'm sort of learning how to code again. But it's amazing when you can think as a designer, if I get the right constructs from a design perspective and I think about the architecture perspective, because you can't forget how things should hang together architecturally. And you think about your business decision space as well. I think that's one really key area that like everyone keeps going and focusing on the process and the journey. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think of sort of breaking things down to those three layers. There's what's the initiative and the intent and the mission we're trying to set out to achieve now. So that might be your product vision and where you want to go, and or who are we trying to serve, and what's the outcomes we're trying to deliver, and
the story.
What's the value, and that's sort of the hero and their call to action, and how do we get there. Then I've worked a lot in banking and I've done a little bit of work in government. There's also a very focused regulatory environment some of these organisations live in as well. So there's a whole massive governance framework that needs to be applied over the lens of the business. And we always think about it in a regulatory context, like policies linked to regulations, which then become, in a business context, will become obligations. You have to meet the obligations when you build a new product.
Yeah.
You meet those obligations by implementing controls. You implement those controls in a process, which basically means those controls have to be embedded into the journey from a customer perspective. So I'll ask you as a home loan applicant, I'll ask you what your income and your expenses are, so I can make can you afford a home loan test. So those data points are there for a risk reason, to make one assessment, and there's many assessments in some of these decisions that businesses make. So I think things will change in the sense that people still focus on the process and the journey, and it's great to understand what's happening and then backward engineer the rules. But if I think about what AI will give us, if you've mapped out your governance and your compliance and your obligations and controls, both from a regulatory perspective, but also strategically, you can say, I'm going to make this decision over that decision. You can codify that in policy. It means that you codify those rules into your journeys. And if I think about what the future looks like, it's probably less process first. We always start with process, which is ironic because it's like, that's the journey. I get it, because we're trying to tell a story.
Yeah.
But for me to make that decision, I almost step out of the story for a moment and say, for me to make, say, a yes, let's say you've migrated from overseas to Australia become an Australian citizen, or even before you get a residency visa or you get a visa to come and stay, you've got to pass a certain number of checks.
Yep.
And you could just have that as a checklist. And what I think will probably happen in the future, the AI agents, you won't need to map a journey from A to Z in a very sequential way. You could do A, E, G, X, as long as there's no data dependencies between those things, and the AI agents will be able to see that. And you may not have your passport details now, so you might say, I've got my pay slips. Okay, Diana, here, just put your pay slip in there, and we'll just work, and then I'll come back and we'll work through the checklist. So you can see how the customer journey is going to be very dynamic. And you may even have agents sourcing some of these things, or you might even go and say, I'll give you consent to go and get my open banking details. And so the actual customer journey, in my mind, doesn't become the customer journey. Like the way I'm sort of thinking about it now, the customer journey actually dies because the customer is a made-up, fictitious entity. But Diana exists and Lucas exists. And what I need at that point in time, so instead of hyper-personalization being just a marketing offers thing, my whole onboarding journey can be hyper-personalized.
Becomes the experience.
So
the customer experience is more individual. So
I think the irony for me is we all have all our unique onboarding stories. I no longer have to have the same story anymore. So by stepping out of the journey and the story and looking at what the actual rules are for making a decision, I can then optimize that for every individual in the world to meet them where they're at. And the only time I have to have things in a very specific order is if I have some sort of data dependencies, because I can't do this check until I've done this check done. Wow.
I feel like we've gone into a bit of a rabbit hole, but
but I think there's like I see these things, and I think the irony is what I do, if I take it even a meta step back, is if I think about, like, you go back to the Industrial Revolution, and prior to that, we used to identify ourselves as what we did. So if I was a baker, my surname was Baker. If I was a blacksmith, my surname was Smith. Yep. If I was a roofer and I was a straw roofer, I was a Thatcher. So we literally identified as doing. We were human doings, if you like. And as the Industrial Revolution came about and took away some of those jobs and what we actually attached to, a lot of our identity structures and self-esteem that was attached to what we did would have fallen away. So then you had the Luddites going and revolting, because it's like, if I can't do that, who am I? I can't provide for my family. So there's also a survival element. I need to have some income to live, but there's also an element of if I can't do what I'm on this planet to do, what am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
Now, as we've sort of progressed through life, we've moved from human doings to human thinkings. And even actually, if I think about think visual, it's a thinking thing. So we started having knowledge workers. So it's sort of, we start looking at knowledge and information. Now AI is coming along, and it's artificial intelligence. It's taking away that thinking element of it.
Yeah,
so
the information. Yeah.
So we've moved from human doings to human thinkings, and we identify. And even some of my personality structure, I over-identify with being the clever guy in the room and people will probably notice in this talk where I just rabbit and go all these different tangents all over the place. And that's me and my ego just going nuts and just riffing on random shit.
And then, what's next?
So then,
that's taken away.
If that's taken away, what's next? And I think the next stage will be moving away from thinking, and hopefully we get into be human beings.
Interesting.
And I think as we progress through what's going to be a really tough time, because I'm expecting people will have identity. There'll be an identity crisis out there. So if you're in psychology, awesome. But design is very much focused on human emotions and thinking. Like you have an empathy map. It's what we say, do, think, and feel.
Yep.
If there's anyone who's going to try and help solve that shift, designers have a role to play in that. And how do we actually move people from thinking beings to actual beings? How do we let go of our constructs? And
that's great. I love that actually.
It's and I don't know how we're going to get there, because I think that's nobody really knows. But I think there's sort of patterns at play where this may play out, and I think when that does happen, I think there's so many things that we have constructed in society that literally fall apart, and you go, what does that mean?
So tell me a little bit about the growth habit and the work you're doing.
Yeah, so the growth habit was something I started a long time ago, but never really started. So, but I'm really keen to kick that off in earnest. I'm in between roles at the moment, so I have a little bit of downtime between the role I've just finished and the role I'm about to start next week. So it's going to be a bit of a side gig for me, but it's really focusing on emerging leaders and helping them find their pathway to step into their leadership potential. And if I break it down into what I want to try and solve for, is like if I think about someone as an emerging leader, there's someone who's built up the capability to be able to lead, but there's something that's holding them back. And I think there's sort of a few layers to that. One is the capability that they have as a foundation. You need to have skills that you've learned over time. But then what gets in the way might be the stories that you tell yourself about your capability. And that's sort of what I've classed as confidence. So what are you telling yourself that stops you stepping into your potential? What gets in the way? Maybe it's not a confidence thing. Maybe you're getting, you gravitating towards a new shiny toy, which is one of my bad habits. One of the reasons why I start things and never finish them, because I'm loving the next new shiny toy. But there's an intention behind that. What's that intention? How do you unpick that? And that intention is all baked in a story. So using a bit of storytelling techniques to understand what's the narrative that I tell myself that I don't even know about myself. When I identify that narrative, I can then have a choice. Do I want to change that narrative? And if I change it, what do I need to do? What growth habits do I need to be able to grow into and grow that confidence to build out that dimension of leadership to help me move into that role of a future leader. And then the second layer above capability, so obviously confidence is one, is how we get ourselves in the way. The next is what credibility do we have? So what stories are we telling others? So it's all about how others perceive us, and what stories are they telling themselves about us that we may not even know. So a lot of leadership will then be focusing on, like, if you want a leadership opportunity, quite often someone needs to give you that opportunity. So if you don't have the credibility and you haven't worked out how to drive that perspective in others, you probably don't have the opportunities someone else might have. So you might be really confident, you might be really capable, but the credibility is what gets in the way. So how do you build that capability up? And again, that's getting into that context of storytelling. And I always talk about story listening as well, because you can't just keep telling, because sometimes you need to listen. And that's a big part of leadership. So that element of listening is really, really important. So that'll be something I'll sort of work through with people who I help. And really then it's the nucleus of all three of those elements coming together. So capability as the foundation, and then confidence and credibility as the pathways that get you to that leadership opportunity. And I'm shaping something around that be very experiential, get very deep. So it's a mixture of coaching and mentoring and training. And we'll be doing that with a peer group, and we'll all learn from each other, because I don't profess to be the expert.
That sounds like it's very relevant, actually, with the shift you're talking about from human thinkers to human beings.
Yeah, for sure. And I think again, even going back into that moment, like there'll be some phases we go through in that process where it's all about self leadership,
Yep.
leading self. There's leading others, and there's leading movements. And I think that there's going to be movements that happen that we want to see the waves, and you might want to ride that wave and help even generate that wave and make it bigger, so we get to an outcome quicker.
But in order to do that, we need to understand ourselves and our story and where we fit into that.
Yes,
right?
And then you need to be able to relate with others, because leading isn't telling people what to do.
Yeah,
it's moving hearts and minds. So you need to have an element of influence. And ironically, while storytelling is a great way of influencing, if you listen to other people's stories and find out what drives and motivates them, then you can harness that as a skill to help guide them in a way, or let them choose the way that's right for them.
Yeah.
But you'll listen to them and help them find their way. And I think that's what leadership actually is you're helping others actually find their path, not telling them what our path is. It's like we need to do this collaboratively and collectively.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think that's a great spot to end. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If people want to chat to you more, where can they find you?
Look, I think LinkedIn. I tend to be very active on LinkedIn. I'm always networking, having chats with people.
Yeah. And in person as well.
And in person, Sydney Design Thinking. Like run a meetup with a few fellow designers in the industry. So we meet every second Thursday of the month, most months, or 10 months of the year.
Yep.
And look, hopefully the Growth Habit will be up and running as a thegrowthhabit.com.au. Not sure when it might be coming out.
Great.
Coming soon.
When it comes out, we'll put a link to it as well in the show notes.
And then
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Lucas.
My pleasure.